Tuesday, 5th of September, 2023. You're back for another and one of probably the final, if not the penultimate, let me say, podcasts for Tiger Town for 2023. You're back with Zac on this end, Toby on that end. I am back. I'm back in action this week. Couldn't miss more than a week in a row. And, mate, how are you going on the other end of the line there tonight?
Oh, mate. Yeah. Not bad. Long season. It was a long season. So, as much as I love my footy, I'm kind of glad it's over and we can call it quits for a bit. But,
put us out of our misery a little bit, eh?
Yeah, especially after the weekend. It was frustrating to watch, but I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. But look, 2023 is behind us now. That's all I can say, and that's all I can hope is that 2024 is a hell of a lot different.
That's about all we've got at this point. I think is hope. It's all we've had for a little while. So
yeah.
What about yourself? We talk about, a lot of people talk about rock bottom, and the teams and clubs need to hit rock bottom. We thought we were there last year. Perhaps,
you actually said that last year.
Perhaps it was the 8 games in out of 48, and the 2 years combined. I mean, Newcastle had 3 in a row, Para had 2 in a row. So let's hope this is us, and we can move on up starting next year, right?
Yeah, and I think Doggies had 2 in a row too, didn't they?
Did they? I didn't know that they picked up a spoon or two. I should probably go back and have a look and see who got the spoon over the last 10 years. I know Newcastle and Para obviously featured pretty heavily, but I can't remember the other teams.
Look, you do your thing and you tell me about what's been going on, and I'll have a bit of a squiz, eh?
What's been going on, mate, is we went up to Gurry, Fraser Island last week for 3 nights. My father and I and a mate of mine went up for a bit of a pseudo-impromptu fishing trip, and unfortunately clashed with the podcast, which I only realised last minute. We had a great time up there, mate, but unfortunately I was crook the whole time, and quite crook. Pretty fevery and shivery, and I've still got a lingering cough now. So borderline as to say whether being at home well is better than being on Gurry sick, but it was good nonetheless, and reeled in quite a few Taylor and a handful of dart, which was nice. And, more importantly, got out there with a mate and the old man, and, we had a great time. So, sickness aside, it was good. We saw a few of the sites, and first time for my father over there on Fraser Island, and, it was good to show him around a little bit. I've only been there a couple of times myself now, but it's, always good to go back. Great spot. What about you, mate? How's your last week? I had a good tune in with you and Todd. Guest host extraordinaire Todd on the other end. You guys had a great show last week.
We did. We had good fun. We didn't get into an argument, which is different for us. I mean, we're brothers. We usually argue majority of the time. But yeah, it's good to get, I guess, somebody else opinion. Like, it'd be good if you were here and we could have had it as a trio, but you decided to bail on our listeners and go have some fun. So, each their own, I guess. Each their own.
Mate, man's got to eat. So I had to feed the family. I had to go catch a few fish and break a few pieces of bread. So, I mean, I'm not Jesus, but if I can multiply them and catch 3 and turn them into thousands, and happy days, the family might eat for a bit. So you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
I will say as well that thanks for taking the reins last week. I don't think that the hosting gig is in your stars, mate, to be honest. I think you did a bearable job. I think you did okay. I think the listeners would back us up on that. But, glad to be back in the hot seat, mate, running the show here tonight. And I will just actually make a serious note that apologies last week for the audio issues. We did sort that out a little bit late over the weekend, but last week's show is up and running. If you want to go through that and have a good listen prior to us realising that the debacle happened with the Manly game at the end. So you might not want to particularly go back and revisit it, but the boys, Todd and Toby, do talk about a lot of wonderful stuff last week, and it was a great show. So it is worth going back and having a bit of revisit, particularly now with, a lot of the Tiger the West Tigers media wrapping up a little bit heading into the off season, so might be a good opportunity for you to go back and revisit last week's episode. I think episode 55 was it? Is that right?
Say that last part, you cut out.
Was it episode 55, 56
No, something like
last
that.
week?
We're putting
Something
up the
like that.
numbers these days. We're putting up the
Yeah,
numbers
we
these
are
days.
pushing into the second of the double digits.
Yeah. So just to recap, I thought I'd go back and have a look at who got the past wooden spoons from 2010 onwards. So we all know who got 2010 in the fact that was Melbourne because they were stripped, which is funny. I don't know about you, but I find that funny. 2011.
Who came second last that year, I wonder?
Probably us. Oh, no, wait, we actually made top four.
We made the semis 2010.
Yeah. 2011 was the Titans. 2012 and 2013 was Para. 2014 was Cronulla. 2015
that was the Asada scandal, I think, wasn't it?
Yep. 2015, 16, 17 was the Knights. 2018 was Para. 2019 was Titans. 2020 was Broncos. Yeah. 2021 was the Bulldogs, and then we've got the last two.
Well, the Broncos one, was that a legitimate one?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's when they just sucked with Anthony Seibold.
That's right. Wow. It's hard to think back that they were that bad. Geez, that was a great time for rugby league.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was so good. It was in the heart of COVID. I remember.
Rugby league's going well when two things are happening. When Brisbane Broncos and South Sydney are both struggling. That's when rugby league's at its best.
So you're halfway there this year.
Halfway there, yeah. And last year was good because it crashed and burned. So,
yep.
There you go, Titans. Completely forget about the Titans doing anything because no one follows the Titans. Everyone forgets they're even a team.
Worst franchise in rugby league.
Yeah, after Canberra, three quarters of the year, no one remembers them. Anyway, there you go. Interesting.
It's because
Parramatta. I forgot Parramatta went back and had another crack at it in 2018. That was only 5 years ago. 4 years later, they played in the grand final.
It was the first full year Moses was there. Think about that.
Yeah, and I would say the squad would have been not remarkably similar, but somewhat similar.
I think they had Corey Norman in the halves with Moses back then. I think Gutho was still a fullback, and I think they had basically
still there.
Yeah, Radradra.
Yeah,
Sammy was there, so they basically had Sebo again. In terms of just a bullocking winger. Yeah, wouldn't have looked too much different. I think they had Jennings as well.
Yeah, they would have done. That was when Jennings was playing well. Oh, well, no, Jennings was playing, not beating his misses up. There you go. 4 years later. Hey, mate, that's in the public record. There you go.
Yeah,
All right.
I just said stuff and things.
So, Manly, last week, out at Lotto Land Brookie, 54-10. I think his final score, 54-12. I can't remember if he slotted that second goal, now, scoreline, they butchered a couple, but they also they shouldn't have been allowed to score 4 of their tries, which were illegitimate, at least 4 for that.
5, I counted.
5, yeah. I haven't rewatched it for obvious reasons. That being said, let it be made abundantly clear right now. In no way were we winning that football game. Within the first literally 40 seconds when they scored, you could tell straight away it wasn't happening. And let's lay some objective facts on the table for people who had to sit there and suffer through that game. They were as near full strength as they could possibly have been. They're only missing probably Trbojevic and Garrick and Josh Aloiai, who hasn't been there for a long time. And he's a lawnmower at best anyway. Garrick is simply a backup for Trbojevic anyway. And then they had Talatau Kula step in. So they basically fielded their full-strength team. We fielded a bunch of kids. Basically,
Yeah.
if you look at the list of the type of people we were missing, we had two 18-year-olds debuting,
Yep. Had
and
a third one on the bench.
a third came onto the bench. So three 18-year-olds in the same side, all of which were playing SG ball the start of this year.
Yep.
Um, you can add that. Sorry, add Matamua to that as well. He's 19 years of age. He was playing SG ball this year, and outside of that, you just have to go through the list of people in our side to see exactly the type of side that we rolled out. So we used it as an opportunity to look to the future and give a couple of guys a chance. They used it as an opportunity to completely crush a hapless opposition and rub salt into the wound. And not any more evident was that than the insults that they were doing by throwing passes to their teammates in the in goal and the smarmy look on Cherry Evans' face every single time they scored a try against the hapless opposition who were coming last. At a certain point, you would think that you put the cue in the rack and you, at the very least, show a bit of humility. That bloke was carrying on like he dead set won the premiership every single time they would score. And yeah, really put a sour taste in my mouth, mate. That's for sure.
Yeah, see, look, I, to a point, understand it for the fact that it was Gerbo's 200th. Obviously that's why they probably fielded a full-strength side, that they could go out with a win and celebrate a win for his 200th. I'd like to think that if we were in the same position for one of our boys, we would have done the same thing. So, but at the same time, the carrying on, that's Cherry Evans to a T-bar. Always has been. Everything everything's a competition to that bloke, no matter what it is. If he was in an egg and spoon race, he would run up to somebody, knock the egg out, and pick it up and throw it in their face. He's just a competitive bloke. So, not that there's like it doesn't, put a sour taste in your mouth, but I don't really expect anything less from him.
I don't disagree that he's competitive. I don't think that what we saw on the weekend was somebody who was showing a competitive spirit, though. That to me is a competitive nature. That's just being classless and being a grub. The carry on was the stuff that I didn't like.
Oh, he's a
You saw
Queenslander, mate.
Oluwatu score a try where he basically just swatted away a couple of flies and got up and barely smiled. That was someone who understood the situation. They understood that they were beating up a hapless opposition, and he just sort of did what he had to do. So, yeah, look, it's that's the objective facts. Is those are the sides that were fielded, and if you have a look at what the Tigers had to play for at that point, there was absolutely Buckley 0 and none. And as you pointed out, Manly at least had something to play for at that point. And of course, we run into them at home in the last game of the season in what should have been a dead rubber. And of course, it happened to be Jake Trbojevich's 200 to give them something to play for, wasn't it? Because, the Tigers are the side of course it is. So, anyway, a bit of a debacle, mate. And I did mean that PSA at the beginning to basically state clearly we weren't winning that football game. It wasn't going to happen.
But there was a method behind why we fielded the team that we did. So, and I'd like to talk about those boys for 2 secs because honestly, I was actually quite impressed with majority of the 18, 19-year-olds. I think Valley was.
And I think we'll jump into them in 2 seconds. I just wanted to say though, the officiating.
Oh,
do we need to say anything? There was moments in there. I watched it with my father, unfortunately, and never gives me a bone in any way, shape, or form. And he was laughing, and it wasn't a humiliating laugh. It was just an empathic. What are you supposed to do with your son sitting there on the couch next to you, just copying what we were copying? And I was tired and all this sort of stuff, and then still sick, and you try to find words to say anything and to sort of indicate that this is what happens to us every single week. And you look at all the forward passes calls we've copped in the last few months and how costly they've been. And then some of that stuff gets turned up on the weekend. It's just, I think I said a few weeks ago, they stopped calling forward passes now. Is that what the thing is? And no, they try to one up themselves.
No, see, that's the thing. I said if you listen to the commentary, on the Fox Sports commentary, obviously because it was on Channel 9, even the commentators were saying this was a stitcher. Like they said that the forward pass that led to their third try from Gerbo was forgivable. the one from Bullymore to
It was
Bullymore,
forward, though.
like, yeah, it was forward, but it was forgivable. It was forward, but it was like, you know, positional play, you know, where the refs would position that you can forgive that it might have been missed, not from the touchies. That's kind of their job. But the one to Bullymore where he scored, blatantly forward. And then the one from Cooler, I couldn't believe that one. Even the winger, Vega, I think his name is, looked like he was going to get pulled up. He didn't even put it down. He was like, oh, it's forward.
You mean the one from Olakawatu to Bullymore under the sticks?
No,
The one
that's
where he
the
was
second
in.
one. That was the second
that
one.
was the one for me because that. Yeah. Anyway,
No,
we're not going to harp on about it. We weren't winning our football.
From Cooler to Vega.
But I tell you what. What's that?
The one from Cooler to Vega, like he passed that, like literally right in front of, and I want to touch on this touch judge in particular. I think his name's Ziggy. We call him Ziggy. It was passed from behind the 10-meter line, out of the hands. It travelled over the 10-meter line.
Yeah.
Out of the hands.
He wasn't moving forward.
He wasn't moving forward.
There was no momentum involved.
No.
Yeah.
And then after that, the commentators couldn't believe how quickly they skimmed past how, you know, Cherry Evans lost control when he was trying to put his try down. And then when they turned over Papali'is, they literally said over commentary, laughed and said, this has to be a stitch-up.
Yeah.
When the commentators
and then, did you see Asu Kapawa's try? How many replays they tried to play of that one to try to take it off us as well?
Yeah, it's the exact same as a few weeks ago when we were, you know, I don't know who we were playing, but when they were reviewing the opposition, whoever they were doing it very quick, and they were, you know, approving the try or awarding the try, and then they were looking at ours from every single angle to try to take it off us. But then I just want to say that Touchy, I wanted to harp on him a little bit. This isn't bash the Touchy, but he deserves it. I watched the Knights game the next day or the day after, whenever it was, and the same Touchy, he knows what a forward pass is because he called 2 within the first 10 minutes. He just didn't feel the need to call it with us.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and the Dutch, they need to do something about that in the off-season because barring the fact that the calls we copped this year, which are unlike any year I can possibly ever remember, and that includes last year against the Cowboys. If you put the sum of the decisions that we copped this year side by side with last year, it far exceeds it, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And yeah, it almost made it unwatchable. I came close to turning the game off at about 60th minute. Whenever that Tolatau Cooler pass was, after I'd copped all the other passes, I'd copped the Cherry Evans one, I'd copped the Isaiah Papali'i no try. I had my finger on the button ready to turn it off. And if there's anything that you and our listeners know is I watch every minute of every match.
Yeah.
And I was very close to the last 20 minutes of the season, knowing there was no more games for us for 6 months, turning it off. Because it was at the point where I was like, this isn't even a game of football anymore. It's not being officiated to the NRL rules. What is the point of watching? And people from opposition supporters, as seems to be the case these days, apparently everyone just punches down now and just makes fun of shit clubs, which didn't seem to happen back in the day. Apparently people used to be supportive, but anyway. And they'll sit there and they'll say 54-12, you got shellacked, your defence was hopeless, you missed 61 missed tackles. Yes, we did. We did. But if I'm going into an off-season after the roughest year or one of the roughest years supporting this club, I would much rather the last round have been 32-12 than 54-12, or 30-12 than 54-12, or 30-18, because this is the type of score that should have been, despite the fact we missed all those, because they did not score those tries. Yet, again, we're humiliated, and the headlines come in, and that makes it all worse, and then it makes their responses worse, and all that sort of stuff as well. So it's a snowball effect. These things don't happen in a vacuum, and removing those tries does make a difference, even if it is just at the scoreline and the morale of an absolutely beaten and battered and dying fan base, you know. Anyway. It's I was feeling pretty rough on Friday evening off the back of that, if I'm being honest. I know it's hard to say if it was worse than the Cowboys game in terms of how I felt, but I think just given the time of the season and the way that the decisions went, the fact it yeah. Anyway, yeah, it wasn't good. It was a horrible way to end the season.
Yeah, it wasn't great, and it was frustrating, and everything you can kind of lump underneath it, and yeah. But as I was going to mention before, like we're off the officiating now, and we're talking about the young guns that were playing that game.
Yep. Yep.
So a little bit of light at that when it was a bit dark on Friday night was Kit Lowley. Oh, that guy just looked like he deserved to be in first grade straight away for an 18-year-old, which is phenomenal. Ran
Yeah, he's a
hard,
footballer.
tackled hard. He made an error. Yes, he did. But as soon as he did, he was dirty with himself, and you could tell that. I've always had a look at how people react to mistakes and how people react to poor decisions. Perfect example is whenever Noffa makes a mistake, he just sort of smiles about it. Oh, that's all right. I'll still get $100,000 for this game. Don't worry about it. Kit Lally, he was dirty with himself. And so you knew he was going to try to do something to make up for it. And he did. He tackled hard. He ran hard. Everything he did was at 100 miles an hour. And I loved every second of watching him. Loved it. I hope he's in the squad next year. If not, really, he's got to be knocking on the door.
No, mate, he is. He bit of background information about Kit Lauliti. It's a tough name to say. We're going to have to get used to it because he's going to be around. He and his brother, his younger brother Luke, who's a fullback coming through. He was captain of Harold Matt's winning side, and he captained the SG Ball. And he's been playing flag and been playing cup as well. He's someone who the club have had in the plans for a long time. He's a middle forward, so prop / lock. He's got pretty good hands as well. Not quite to that degree of Matamua, but he's up there. So they see him in that sort of space, just basically a middle forward, so prop / lock. But from all reports, and they have spoken about it for a long time, he's been not only in the leadership groups, but one of the hardest workers in the club and just an absolutely honest, genuine, fantastic head on his shoulders young kid. Exactly the sort of person that you want to have in your club for a long period of time. He's a born and bred Tigers junior, and he's going to be a bloke that's going to be around for a long time. So yeah, very pleasing to see. I agree with what you were saying. They zoomed in on his face, and you could tell he was absolutely distraught with what had happened on that play the ball. And yeah, very pleased. And I was actually pleased to see that Benji left him out there and gave him a good amount of minutes to sort of make up for what he did, which was good to see, despite what was happening with the scoreline.
100%. And that's, yeah, it was just so good to see. Like, I was so impressed with him. And I was also really impressed with, I've been saying Felidi, but all the commentators were saying Felidi. So,
It's Felidi.
Well, that's what the commentators were saying, was Felidi.
Yeah, Felidi.
So,
yeah.
yeah,
I think Josh had more of a rocks and diamonds game, you might say. But I actually think, and this is back to what we've spoken about probably every second or third pod, as much as he looked as though he'd made a couple of errors in defence at first glance, I actually think he was a bit of a victim of having Appy inside of him. We've spoken ad nauseum about the quality of a defensive half inside a centre and how that can affect a centre's decision making. Appy missed a tackle one-on-one from Ola Kawatu in the first 40 seconds, just got steamrolled, which led directly to a try, and he was on Folletti's side. And I think from that moment on, Josh was in two minds as to what to do. He didn't know whether to stay in and help Appy out because he saw what a threat he was, or to jam in or slide. And I think that played with his head the entire game. And unfortunately, that's hard. And it's even harder on your debut in first grade. And it's even harder again if you're an 18-year-old trying to fix those things on the run. So all the things we talk about that centres have to deal with in defensive decisions, I think he was a victim of, not least of all the fact that Appy, who is a great defender in the middle, He's an average defender on the edge.
He is not
Quite
great.
an average defender on the
Yeah,
edge.
he goes low all the time, which works in the middle. It works in the middle.
Yeah.
Does not work on the edges. Because if you miss that tackle in the middle, you've got your 3 forwards there to back you up and go over the top. But going low in the middle also slows that down for your big men to actually come in. You go low in the middle and you miss, there's always going to be a 3-on-2 overlap. So, no, I 100% agree. That's what I said on the pod last week was, I obviously we love Appy. We wish Appy would stay forever and just keep plugging away and leading from the front, but do that in the middle. He's by far a dummy half, and I don't think a lot of his, I guess a lot of his power plays or a lot of his positive aspects of his game translate to a halfback. So,
no, and let's be honest, it was pure and utter necessity. I mean, we were missing everyone. You saw Will Smith went in there last week, and we couldn't even get through last week with Will Smith in the halves. He was that bad.
Yeah.
Wakeham obviously is down in New South Wales Cup. He's not an option. Brooks out, couldn't get back. Dewey's been out for the whole year. And Dane Laurie, whilst he had a couple of good games a month ago, has been absolutely woeful. So we just simply had to play him there out of pure sheer necessity. So, there's good and bad with it. But just back to Folletti for a sec. So I actually don't think that defensively, I think he's still got a lot of work to do, no doubt. No doubt. Defensively, he's got work to do, but most players at that age do. And especially given the importance of centre, he'll continue to improve and he'll continue to work on that. What I liked is physically he looked up to it. I saw at one point, who did he grab a hold of? I think it was Jason Saab. He grabbed him in almost like a back suplex position and just picked him up and just ragdolled him into the ground. I thought, Jason Saab might be built like a pencil, but he's 6 foot friggin' 20 and he's a season first grader now.
Yeah.
And, Folletti, just this 18-year-old kid, looks like he's had a couple of extra pies and durries down at the local bakery with a mullet. Just manhandled him. And, he had a couple of good carries with the ball. He didn't shirk his responsibility with the tough stuff. So he's very raw, but I do like what I see from him.
Yeah, I think that unlike Kit, I think Kit can jump straight into a bench role for me. I think that an off season, a bit of weights behind him. He's already got that power just to sort of build that explosiveness of that. Build on that explosiveness. With Folletti, or Felity, or however we're going to say his name. I'd like to hear it from the horse's mouth before I keep going on about it, but there you go.
Felity. He did an interview last week on westtigers.com, so it's Felity.
Felity.
Or Folletti.
And, I think that he will most likely spend a lot of time next year in New South Wales Cup playing against men. To build that, I guess, that base, especially that defensive base. I don't think he, like you said, I don't think he was as bad as what it looked like on the field at times. I think it was more for the fact that Appy's not a good outside defender, and he felt he had to protect his inside man more often than not. So. That was probably,
and it wasn't even Appy's decisions for each try that led to it. It was more it was the lack of the trust or they're not understanding Appy's capacity to be able to handle the situation that was sown into Folletti's mind early in that game. Like I said, that then led him to be unsure in his decision making.
First 40 seconds, Appy missed the tackle on Olakuatu, who offloaded it to Cooler and scored.
Yeah. And then they just kept going back to that same side and they just kept having success there. They also tossed the ball around and almost everything stuck on the night as well. And we know how those games go. We did one of our own against the Cowboys and scored 66 points. It was just...
the only game in about 10 years that's happened.
Yeah, so that can happen too. As much as they bombed a couple, a lot of their big floaty, loopy sort of passes stuck. There was one where Olukawazu picked it up off his bootlaces and they scored off the back of that. It's like, you might pick up 3 or 4 out of 10 of those on the run for a big man like that. I know he's got good hands. 3 or 4 out of 10 like that is good. So yeah, it was one of those nights. But
Yeah.
the two boys I think gave a pretty good account of themselves in spite of that. And yeah, hopefully, just makes them hungrier moving forward. I agree with you. I think Kit physically is ready to go in terms of that impact prop off the bench, and considering that he's opened up as a possibility heading into next year, he might be one we might be discussing possibly as a 1-2 punch with Fanua Pole off the bench next year, which would be a very exciting prospect because leg drive built like brick shit houses.
Yep.
That could be something we could investigate.
Yeah, 100%. So, but yeah, that's it for the 2023 season. No more. They can't hurt us anymore, as Todd said in the chat. They can't toy with our feelings, and that's both the players and the officials. Sorry, but what if we had to think about, I guess, the 2023 season? We know that there was a lot of downs and a lot of shit feelings after games, but apart from the Cowboys game, was there anything that really stood out for you for the 2023 season?
Yeah, there's probably a couple of things, but I'll take the road less travelled and I'll talk about the debuts. So I
Yep.
think that Sheens had mentioned that he was hoping to debut quite a few kids and give them a taste during the course of this year. And I think everybody around the traps knew that this year was always a bridging year and possibly next year as well, as we move on the longer term trajectory. But seeing the likes of Talon De Silva and Folletti and Kit Laulalei, seeing Tristan Riley, who ended up coming pretty good, and I was pretty pleased with. And I will mention as well that I was pretty pleased with his game prior to getting injured again. Defensively,
Yeah.
some of his decisions, some of his jamming is as good as I've seen someone jam in Tigers colours for a good 5 to 7 years. He was making the correct. He was showing us how you jam correctly. Once you get that feel, you commit and you give absolutely everything. And I was really pleased with that. Who else do we see? We saw Tarsi James have a debut. I'm trying to think who else. Matamil only played 1 or 2 last year, so he ended up getting another couple of games. There's probably 1 or 2 I'm missing in there as well. But yeah, I was keen to start to see a taste of that next wave coming through. I wouldn't have minded seeing the likes of Fargutu get a run. I know Tumeth had a debut far earlier in the year, might have even been round 1 or round 2. So yeah, that was pleasing for me to see Generation Next come through. I know that every club has juniors, and I know that we've banked heavily on ours. So to start to see some of those guys come through was really pleasing for me. And more importantly, it will be as a stepping stone moving forward. So all those guys that we saw, I think, are a big part of the next few years. Some of them a particularly big part, and it'll be pleasing, or it will be exciting. Sorry, to see where those guys go.
Yeah,
Buller,
it's
I
hard to.
forgot Buller. Buller's debut, obviously, and everything
Yeah,
else he did.
yep. Big calls on him
Easy to
being
forget
rookie of
that
the year.
he's a debutant.
It's crazy to think that he only debuted this year. It's hard to think of a time when Buller wasn't there, but then I remember Moses Mbai played fullback. I was like, oh yeah, that's right.
And Dane Laurie.
And Dan Laurie.
Yeah. What about you,
Yeah.
mate? What was something other than the wins that we had and whatnot that you liked about the season or that pleased you about the season?
I got 2 things. The first one, obviously, we've said the wins, but specifically the win against the Dragons, only because I watched that live with my dad, and he's a Dragon supporter, so that was good. Good to get one on him live. But for me, it's probably a little bit more of an extension on what you said in terms of debuts, but more so the people that really stepped up this year, really solidified themselves in as a genuine first grader. I think obviously Pole. I think Pole's like he's one of the first picked now every week by far. Whether he's on the bench or whether he's starting doesn't matter. Apart,
He was a fringe first grader at the start of the year.
yeah, and now he's solidified himself. And another fringe first grader, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think I said it last week. Apart from the last 2 games, Seyfarth has been one of our best, which is crazy to say. He's cut the shit out of his game, and he's still that Labrador chasing a bone. He's, like I said, minus the last 2 games.
Yeah, I know, but yeah, his efforts in the last 2 games really soured me on when I
Yeah,
turned, and then it's like
you're
he
back.
spun me back around. Oh man, he was awful again. Like the chase for that grubber. It's like you did all the effort, and then you just dropped your bundle again. And what else did he do? He had another penalty and a drop ball, and just it's just. I take your point, and I'm right there with you. But those last 2 games, to me, just unwound 85% of the positive stuff he'd done in the couple of months prior. But I do
Yeah,
know what you're saying.
see, it doesn't for me. I don't think anyone really put their hand up the last 2 weeks. So, I mean, Appy had probably his worst 2 games of the year, the last 2 games. Bateman probably did as well. I don't think anyone really stood up the last 2 weeks. So you can sit there and you can pinpoint Seyfarth, but if you do that, you have to pinpoint 80% of the team. So
Yeah, it's just those key errors, though. It's that those key Seyfarth errors. They were back in force. I think the week before last was worse against the Roosters. He was he was terrible, doing all the things that we love him for. But yeah, anyway, I'll let you carry on. Would you add? I'd add Junior Tupou to that list, eh?
yeah, definitely.
So he didn't start. He didn't start the year in wing, obviously. And if you look at the names that you're mentioning, particularly Pole and Tupou, Pole for you and Tupou for me, these are young guys too. So these are 20-year-olds who came through a couple of wraps around, and we saw a taste. They were fringe start of the year. Tupou didn't start the year, and then by the end of the year, they've solidified themselves in their position. And Tupou most definitely, if he's not picked in the centres to start next year, he's the first winger picked, isn't he?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. The only reason that he wouldn't be picked in the centres is because we don't have a quality winger to go outside him. That's it. That'd be the only reason. But yeah, I think that he's definitely there. But also a couple of, we obviously had some big name signings come over. Sometimes they were flat. Sometimes they didn't live up to what we were hoping. But all in all, I think majority of them were good. I think that Clemmer did what he needed to do every single time. Every single time he did what he was needed of him, what was required of him. I think all but maybe 3 games, he reached over triple digits. Sometimes he was, closer to 200 than he was 100. So, I think that Bateman, they did.
We'll just go one at a time.
Okay.
You're happy with Clemens' output this year?
Yeah. I think we like his meter eatage was exactly what we needed. I mean, you think, obviously he's not the only forward on the field, but I think for maybe 70% of the season, we were getting into opposition's 20 zones quite easily through our forward pack. It was the fact that we didn't have the quality to finish it off. And how many opportunities, like you said it almost every single week, how many opportunities we bombed, how many balls we dropped over the line, how many poor kicks we put in, things like that. Had nothing to do with the forwards not getting us down there. Had everything to do with the halves not finishing off the way they should.
And to that point, credit to the forwards for continuing to turn up. How frustrating it must be to continue to lay a platform like they were for at least 2/3 to 3/4 of the season, and just to have their playmakers over their shoulder continue to fuck it up time and time again, either through lack of execution or just through lack of skill through the back line, just not having the talent to do anything with it. It must have been bloody hard for them. So
Bloody hell.
yeah, I agree with Clemmer. I think we got everything we could have hoped for out of David Clemmer. In fact, even one better. I actually thought he was going to be a bit more aggro. And in hindsight, looking back at it, I'm glad he wasn't, because his discipline which would be a drawback with a bit of aggro, was just about perfect. I barely remember him dropping a football, missing a tackle, giving away a penalty. He was everything that you want in a consummate, seasoned professional, particularly in the front row. And yeah, mate, he was great.
Yeah.
Clemmer
No,
was
100%.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So we're just going through those the big four recruits, obviously being Clemmer, Appy, Papali'i, and Bateman.
I'll go big
We might
five
jump.
for me. Big five for me. I think Staines definitely gets look in here as well.
Okay, we can touch on Staines as well.
Yeah.
So we'll go to Bateman. Bateman's
Yeah.
obviously he's a bit of a mixed bag now. He obviously there's a bit of context around that. Late coming over, didn't get to start until round 3, was it? Or
Five, I
round
think.
even round 5 even, yeah.
Yeah.
So no preseason, late starting, jumped straight in at that game against the Bulldogs in near on 40-degree heat and played 60, 70 minutes as
Yeah.
his first game. So what did you make of his contribution this season?
I don't think we used him properly. That was my big thing. I think we gave him. He's not a back rower that runs those lines. He's not an ice. He doesn't. Ice runs really nice lines. We know that. He's a back rower that you give a bit of early ball to. His footwork and his unorthodox playing style is what draws in 3 defenders, and then he gets that flick off. We didn't use him properly. I think that we used him properly in a couple of games, and that was definitely evident, especially in the Cowboys game. I think he set up 2 tries and scored one himself because we gave him early ball. But yeah, it's unfortunate.
Early ball with people around him.
Yeah,
That's the other thing. Far too often he was isolated out on an edge and he'd turn around for an offload or a short ball to someone, there's no one there.
yeah. So,
Hmm.
but
the thing I was most pleased about with Bateman was actually his defensive output. I think we saw what he did on an edge, or in fact, many people didn't see what he brought on an edge, which was he
until you
locked
move the
edges
lock.
down. And that was in spite of the fact that he had a different half inside him almost every second bloody week. He probably had a different centre outside him almost every single frigging week. And so trying to work around with that, or inside, outside, whatever. But yeah, I actually think that I think that John Bateman received a little bit of a bum steer when it comes to not only how he was treated, to your point, and how he was used, but just how he was reviewed with his output this year and what he brought to the table. I think he's sort of transitioned away from being an out and out attacking threat. I think he's still cumbersome and he's unorthodox, and I still think he can make stuff happen. But I think his value moving forward, and was this year, in his ability to uh, solidify an edge. And I think that the possibility of him going to lock next year could work, but I worry of everything that we would be losing with what he does on an edge in terms of just gluing an edge together. I'd love to see statistics, and it's going to be too hard because they change sides and all that sort of stuff to see how many tries were scored down an edge when he was on that edge versus the opposite. But I would option a guess that it would at least be 2-1, and simply because of, or in no small part because of his contribution.
Well, it was never more evident than when they moved him to lock, and how weak that whatever side he was on is usually the right side was in terms of defense. It wasn't tied up, wasn't strong in any way, shape, or form. And then when he moved back there, automatically that was solid. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And you know what Bateman, before we move on to the next one, what Bateman does not do, which I like, which Papali'i does terribly, and Blore has learnt the habit of doing. Papali'i and Blore will turn their inside shoulder and sit in really tight on their half for that lead runner, that second rower that runs the line, and then jam and try to then shift laterally really quickly. Now, that's all well and good in certain situations, but if you've got a team running a slick second man and they nail it, you're fucked because you've got no ability to get across. And I wouldn't say Papali'i and Blore are the most agile second rowers laterally. And the amount of times that I saw Papali'i in particular, and I saw Blore do it on the weekend several times, get caught in too close to their half and the ball go out the back, which it does, let's be honest, 3/4 to 80% of the time. And that it just left that centre completely exposed, and the winger is just it's just a subsidiary of what the centre's able to do. Bateman didn't do that. I found that he would often umbrella up a little bit earlier and sort of cut that off a bit earlier. Whether or not that was a ploy or defensive strategy, I'm not sure, but it's just a bit of a segue, I guess, into some weaknesses with Papali'i's game, and I saw it creeping into Blaw's game. And Bateman didn't do that I saw, or at the very least, if he did sit close off his half, then he would be able to push out pretty well. So he brings a lot to that edge, and a lot more than people would notice. I would encourage people in the off season, if you got the time, we've all got time to sit back and watch reruns of Tigers games in a horrible season, don't we? Sit back and watch some of the stuff that.
Sorry, I've got 2 young kids. No, I've got to look after them. I've got to wash my hair too, so I'm good.
Yeah, all 3 of them.
All 3 hairs. Yeah,
3 hairs. Yeah. Anyway, so Papali'i, what do you make of Ice this year? A lot has been made by people.
Deflated is probably the way I could say it. Expected a lot, didn't get a lot. I think he definitely had glimpses of what made him a second rower of the year. I think that the thing that I will never question was his effort. He never died wondering, and that was good to see. Like, even if the ball was well past him, we used to see it for a few times, especially when Joey Leilua played in the side. If a ball went past Joey, he'd just stop and just walk to where the try was going to be. Ice never had that. He tried every time he could, but sometimes, like you said, his defensive decisions were poor. Sometimes his line running was off. Whether that was his fault or the halves' fault, I'm probably going to say that's the halves' fault rather than his, considering we know how unquality or I don't know. Yeah, unquality. Let's just say that's a word right now. Our halves were all year. But yeah, and then you've also always get these rumors going around that he's not happy, that he's this, that, and the other. I'll be honest. If he wants to go back to the Eels, I wouldn't be terribly upset.